Hello, Monica. Welcome to the show. I'm so excited that you're here. I know that you've got a lot of great information to share with the public to, really bring this disclosure into the public eye, express how you key together all these data points to share that your husband, you believe, is in fact recruited into the Super Soldier program. So I can't wait for us to unpack that part of your story. And I also really want, to make sure that people understand that this is not something that is just some random event that no one else could possibly go through this. And I feel like you've got some information to share, about that as well. And I want people to understand who you are, how this is how this subtly comes on into people's lives, there's so much behind the scenes that we need to bring to light. So, welcome, Monica. Let's start with just giving us an overview of what happened with your husband so we can inform the audience. And then I really want to dive into who you are.
That's great, Jennifer. Thanks for having me on your show. Well, there's a lot to this, but where I'll start is that on October 31st, my life changed forever. And God had other plans. And I'm here to share my testimony as well as how God brought me out of all of this. So I'll start with saying that my husband was an active shooter, and he was arrested on October 31st, the most satanic holiday of the year. And his son became an active shooter in October 8th of 2014. And in both situations, God made sure that nobody was harmed, which you usually don't hear about.
Right.
So I want to share, the story and how that is all, God's divine intervention is why I'm here to share that with you today. And then I think it's important, like Jennifer wants to go into my past to understand where some of, God's children get lost. And a lot of it can just be from family upbringing where you don't have a choice. But I'm here to tell you, no matter where you are, who you are, God knows your heart. And that's what's brought me out of everything to this point.
Yeah. And I'm so glad that you're bringing this up, Monica, because, people who have been brought up in homes where there's been abuse, I mean, we know from psychological statistics, surveys in colleges that there's more abusive homes than there are healthy homes.
Yeah.
And, that's just a sad fact. And for us to just become resound that we have to just fall prey to that abuse or like continue to repeat the patterns or become somebody that we're not in order to defend ourselves or to combat, the residual effects from that abuse.
Right. Yeah.
That's not a truth. It's a choice, but it's not a truth. And I'm a huge advocate for PTSD recovery. I've gone
Amen.
through it myself.
Yes.
And so trauma is one of the missions that are close to my heart. So I'm glad that we're talking about this
Yes.
today. So, you've left us with some pretty astounding statements about your husband and your stepson and
Yeah.
and how that has affected your life. I mean, 2021, 2014, this is not terribly long ago. And you're right.
No.
Shooters don't typically come out without harming people, and they don't typically come out alive either. And in both cases, that's, both your stepson and your husband are still living.
Yes.
Both of them have been active shooters and no one has died. These are rare, people. I mean, listeners, listen up. This is not common. And so this makes the story very unique and very common in many ways too. And so I can't wait to
Yeah.
get there and unpack this with you, Monica, but I'm gonna slow the roll for a minute. And I know
Mhm.
that some of the listeners are like, no, wait, but no, this is something that we're gonna organically unpack in probably more than one episode. I'm hoping that Monica, which we talked about behind, before the program, that we're gonna do more than one episode. So I've got her hooked on that already. So don't worry, guys. But I want you to understand who she is. I want you to relate to her in many ways, whether it's, overcoming abuse, whether it's having, you know, connections through some of the things her family has endured, whether it's, having an abusive spouse or partner. There are so many pearls of wisdom this woman can share with you to help you move and next level things. So I want you to understand there's something about her that you're going to be able to connect to. So we're going to just take a step back and we're going to start at the beginning, Monica. So could you
Okay.
tell us about where you grew up and give us a little insight? I mean, I know you, we've got to know each other a little bit.
Mhm.
So, I know that there's some stories there, especially with your mom. So if you could
Yeah,
just start maybe unpacking a little bit of that for the audience, I think that's going to help them draw into who you are and how you were able to get to the point where you're standing up and sharing the story. Most people who've
absolutely.
gone through that would not be able to, in such a short period of time, stand up and be counted and share their
Mhm.
story and say that enough is enough. We all need to be informed. So your bravery alone is just so, it needs to be, people need to like acknowledge that.
Mhm.
And, I want them to understand that you're just a regular person who's gone through, unregular experiences
Right.
and that, you've come out the other side. So let's start there if you
Mhm.
don't mind. Let's start with where you grew up.
Well, I grew up in Moss Beach, which was on the coast of between San Francisco and Santa Cruz. The closest, biggest town people would recognize is Half Moon Bay. And I was basically born into abuse. And my mother was my first abuser that I can remember. She, the whole house was run off of her emotions. And she's got an interesting backstory as well. My thing around that is that everybody that's been abused has been abused.
Yeah,
So
I
there's
agree.
always
I
a
totally agree.
backstory. Right.
I really want you to, I mean, whatever you're comfortable with, but I would love for you to share about your mom's story too, because
Yeah.
I can relate to this because that you and I have parallels there.
Yeah.
Our parents came from abuse, our moms
Yes.
especially is,
Hmm.
but yours is very unique. Your mom grew up in Canada, right?
Yes, she did. Well, she was born in Canada and she was there when she was a little girl. And then they came down to Washington State. So yes, Canada, I've been really, I'm a history buff, so I really like, looking into, and God's been kind of pulling me to understand history and how that plays into our genealogy and, genealogy curses in the Bible that go back 4 generations. So all of that kind of tied me to look, to research more about the Canadian area where she was. And so
What area was that in Canada?
British Columbia. So she was,
Can I just can I thought that's what you were going to say. I want to
yeah,
share something with you.
yes.
So I've never traveled out of the country but once, and I actually went to BC.
Okay.
Um, and as some of my audience who, the show is relatively new as we air right now, so a lot of people don't know me, which you will, but I was born very intuitive. So I've always been hyper aware of the unseen realm.
Hmm.
And when
Yeah,
I
me
was
too.
in BC, yeah, I imagine I flew to Vancouver, but my ultimate destination was Victoria.
Mm.
And I was up in the Big Bear Mountains, and that was fine. But as soon as I came into inner city Victoria, everything in my world changed. It went upside down. You know,
Wow.
there was I was attacked spiritually, which I'll get into in another time. But
Mhm.
the fact that what I wanted to interject is that I found out that Victoria was the world capital of satanic worship.
I don't doubt that.
Victoria.
Yes.
So, and
Yes.
that's well known.
Mhm.
So I just wanted to interject that fact here because a lot
Yeah.
of people I don't believe knew that. I didn't know that before I was there. I didn't find that out
Yeah.
until of my personal experiences. So keep that
Right.
in mind as you know Monica continues to tell her story about her mom.
Yeah. So not only the area, but also our generational ties to the area as well, you have to look at. So I started going into my genealogy, and my mom had told me that her grandmother had told her that they were royalty. And so I started digging into our genealogy, and I found that we are from nobility. So that means that we were in service to the kings and queens. We were the dukes, the ladies, the baroness, the barons, stuff of that nature. And I traced that genealogy back over 20 generations, and I was still going.
Wow.
So,
Wow.
so yeah, so we were, from Scotland, the Durlington Castle, and then I traced us into England. So there's a lot there, and God was just pressing on me to dig through this and call out. He would literally walk me through it, so I would call out places where I needed to pray over immediately, because in that line of nobility there's a lot of you know um how would you say, satanic stuff going on, blood
Yeah.
contracts, stuff like that, to be able to have that type of, status.
I'm really excited. I'm so weird, like chomping at the bit because I'm so excited that you started talking about this because I would love to talk to you off of air because I found similar ties into my bloodline. I'd love to like take match notes.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
that would be wonderful, because I
yeah,
really, I want to learn on this as God is showing me how to close those doors.
yeah, and I actually
So,
do a lot of door closing, but I would love
mhm,
to have more information to
mhm.
know what specific doors to close. Instead of just closing my instincts are great, but having more information I think is always just bringing more potency to the position, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah. So,
yeah. So when you grew up with your mom coming from this just crazy experiences, did I don't think we talked about like what she went through yet, did we though?
no, we didn't. We kind of did on the phone the other day, but
Yeah.
really, Project Paperclip was a big piece to this, I believe. So my mom was born in the 40s, and that was all the time frame that the CIA was bringing in Hitler's scientists into the United States and into Canada, and through the Cabal, all that stuff. So there was a lot of work in the hospitals, in the prison systems, and all of that these scientists were experimenting on the children. So my understanding now is they're probably looking for children that were intuitive, and certain skills that Jesse Zabodar has spoken about as well, is that they were looking and searching for certain, children that they could use in, bringing in Satan's kingdom,
Yeah,
and the
and
work to
and Jesse
prepare for
actually
that.
talks about how they did their selections too. So, well,
Yeah,
that's maybe someday I'll get her on the show and she can talk about some of that. But and
yeah,
the Montauk Project Paperclip,
yes,
um,
yeah,
Looking Glass, all of those are they're
right.
all connected. They're all from the same baseline, essentially.
Yeah,
Um,
so my mom, she was a very sickly little girl. She had lots of allergies. She had different symptoms that they couldn't understand what was going on with her. So her parents went ahead and gave the hospitals permission to go ahead and run tests on her and things of that nature in the hospital. And I am convinced, because of how I grew up and what I know of her demons, that they were most likely assigned to her, and she was tested on for her abilities. So her father was a seventh son of a seventh son, and he was raised in Nova Scotia. And a seventh son of a seventh son in the Scottish rites was a healer. And he was a wonderful man. He was very soft-spoken, and everybody just loved my grandfather. My grandmother, on the other hand, was just very mean-spirited. She was not a good woman. And
I just want to say really quick to interrupt here. For viewers who are watching the video blog, if you're wondering why I'm squirming out of my seat right now, is because all of this is hitting home with me personally. So if you see me squirming, it's because I'm going, oh my goodness, oh my goodness, oh my goodness. You know,
yeah,
Monica, we certainly have more to discuss. We have so much more to
yeah,
discuss. So please
yeah,
continue. But I just wanted, for those who are watching this on YouTube or any video, that they wonder why I'm just crawling out of my chair here. These are
yeah.
things that are just giving me aha moments like crazy. So continue, please.
Yeah, so I believe that my grandmother was my grandfather's handler, and we had very strong women, controlling women in the family on this side. So my grandmother was, I remember being at the dinner table and things would go flying at the dinner table because she would incite fights, and she would put down my grandfather incessantly. And it was just something about that adrenaline, she wanted to cause that chaos. And so I remember my aunt, she became a teacher later in life, and she was very outspoken about the abuse that she got from my grandmother. My mother, no, she never spoke about it much, but her regression of those memories come out when her demons come out, and her demons love to attack me. So if that makes any sense.
It more sense than I'd care for it to, but yeah, it does.
Yeah.
So when you and we'll have to unpack a little bit of that at a time, more so just for me to wrap my head around all the
Yeah.
information you're giving me.
Yeah.
Because there's just like I see so many parallels in my own life, Monica. It is astounding me right now.
Yeah. I mean, I'm hoping this will resonate with a lot of people. I mean, these are things that, that age group from the 40s and stuff, they were told not to talk about those things. So to this day, some of them have a hard time talking about it.
Well, or, like when you were discussing it, just for how I relate, I felt like I fit more into your mom's category because I had allergies as a kid. And they did a lot of testing on me. And my mother acted a lot like how you described your grandmother.
Yeah. And
so that just it's just blowing me away on how this whole thing plays out. And yeah, I'm sure that there are so many people who are going to have light bulb moments as you're talking, or feel triggered, such as I am, like, oh my goodness, because we all feel like we're in a unique situation. We all feel like this is our unique experience that no one understands because the people around us don't apparently seem to get, what we're going through. But when we connect together like this, we're realizing that we're one of many who are stuck in that same trap in many ways.
Right.
And some of us have just, moved through it, and some of us are still stuck. I think about your mom, or like think of my mom. My mom, her coping mechanism has been, and she's softened through the years, but has been to like reprogram herself to have a totally different memory of what the truth is. She has changed her
Yeah,
story to, that's how she has dealt with it, and it's
it's a
working
coping
for her.
mechanism. Yeah. Yeah,
And I'm
you have to.
happy that she's not miserable anymore and that
Mhm.
it's working for some people. But,
Right.
for others, they're caught, they're caught. I think that's where Alzheimer's comes in, where they get caught up in a loop, a memory loop. I worked in
Mhm.
a lot of, you know, nursing homes and group homes in my day. So I've seen a lot of different situations, but let's go back now.
Well,
And it
too,
will,
they're doing a lot of mind control on
indeed.
us.
Indeed, they
So,
are. Yeah, and
you
the
know,
medication
mhm,
experiments, and I mean,
exactly.
there's a a multitude. You know,
Yes, there really is.
I didn't see it as much as the group home, surprisingly, as I did
That
the
is
nursing home.
surprising.
I know, but I think that one of the reasons was for my particular cases, I worked on the hardest cases in our state. They
Mhm.
even left their counties, which is really unheard of. But I think that whatever had been done was already done to them, and we were just managing them at that point.
Gotcha. Gotcha.
So that I didn't see personally, but
Okay.
I think that they were I think it was the beyond situation for them.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
So,
let's take this back a little bit. We'll dive into the family lineage again, but just because of time, I really want you to explain your personal take on childhood, like coming growing up, you know, by the Moss Beach distillery area.
yeah, so there was a lot of stuff going on the coast. Understanding that, I guess how the quadrants are broken up for, witches and witchcraft and stuff like that. They have um, certain demons assigned to, the coastline, the water lines. So I grew up down there and you could feel it. I was very intuitive to that stuff and you could feel it. There were a lot of demonic spirits on the coast. And my mom actually, went to a medium and got involved in, speaking to these spirits and stuff like that. So she was opening, doors as well, to what it was like a whole occult following on the coast,
yeah.
of that stuff. And
And I
there was a
wonder
lot of
if it
psychic
was part of the,
activities.
sorry, I'm sorry about that.
Oh,
I'm
that's fine.
wondering, I'm just I'm so excited because, I wonder if that was part of the program. Because like I said, I can relate a lot to your mom, and I did the same thing.
Yeah, I mean,
You
it,
know,
it was
that
all
was,
over the place.
but
Yeah.
that's what I did. I searched
Mhm.
through, the supernatural realms, and I did the whole new age journey and
Right.
looked underneath all of those rugs.
Yeah.
Um,
Mhm.
I was a medium. I did all of those things.
Mhm.
So I mean, I think I did the work. So I'm not in this, same place as some people who were stuck, or maybe it's just because the next generation, it just offered us a different option. But,
I think, um, like we were talking about before the show started, and I found something that was really profound this morning. And it was really about, because I keep on getting through my story, God was telling me that he knows my heart.
yeah,
He knows me, right? So even before I was here. And so that leads me into, no matter what doors we open, where we go, if you can just remember that God can find you in your darkest hour, you know, regardless if you have a Bible in front of you, regardless. If you have that thought in your head, then you're already connected with God and he can deliver you out. And so that's kind of my testimony, is that no matter the abuse and no matter the spiritual doors, no matter any of that, God was always there with me. He's omnipresent. People think that God's not there. He is. And he
yeah,
loves all of us. And he wants us to know that he is more powerful than all these tricks of the dark that have been played on us. They're tricks.
Yeah.
They're trying to take our soul and, steal it away from God. And we have to know that we are connected with him, and he wants to have that relationship with us. And so now, no matter what you've done, you know, everything can be undone.
That's right.
And I think the enemy wants us to feel like, no, you've gone too far. You can't turn back.
Oh, yeah, especially with guilt or remorse or bitterness,
Right.
right? All
Yes.
of those things are victimhood. That's a
Yes.
popular one, and
Yes.
we've all experienced it. I've gone through that,
Yeah.
I'm sure you have too, Monica. We've all
Yes.
gone through that pains, and
Yeah.
but God has his hand in each one of us. I always say that God had his hand on me through all of this. And
Yeah. And also, too, I wanted to say that when I sin, I take it to God, right? No matter what it is. A lot of people hide from God because they think their sin is so great. And so if sin separates if you let it,
mhm.
right?
Well, and it's really about breaking, like you were mentioning before, about the different quadrants and the witchcraft. And I truly believe that there's a veil that's been
Yes.
placed on us, making us
Yes.
think that, putting those thoughts in our head, even maybe like, if we even, because there's so many different ways that we're being attacked. There's the witchcraft, there's also the scientific equipment
Yes.
or technology, we'll say, that
Yeah.
that's being used. So whatever it is, God is stronger than all of it. So it's a matter
Mhm.
of just
Mhm.
looking at the possibilities. That's where I started. And when I do my
Right.
coaching,
Yeah.
I go, you thinking about it, you're thinking about it, or you're ready to take action. And
Right.
so we're all at a different phase, right? So wherever you are while you're listening to this, just know
Yeah.
that, wherever phase you're at, it's okay. Just lean into that phase so that you can get comfortable enough to move to the next one. You don't have to jump, you know,
Yeah.
you don't have to jump from one to the finish line. It usually doesn't work that way. But taking that
Yeah.
little step is going to get you where you're going. Yeah. So, wow, we could take this so many ways because there's just so much
No.
here. And, I
Yeah.
just enjoy you so much because you're just a force to be reckoned with, for one. And second, we have so many things in common to discuss. I
Yeah.
get really
And
excited because it helps us
yeah,
both
me
with our own
too.
journey.
Me too. I do want to say that from the youngest age, I had a relationship with God, and that we all come into this world, as babies, and they say we're very intuitive as babies, right? And we have that relationship with God.
Hmm.
So he's there with us from the beginning of our life here on earth as well. So I was fortunate enough to have that relationship and to know that he was there. And so that saved me through, my abuse. Not that I didn't suffer, I did,
Right.
but there was always that conversation with God.
And
And
I want to say this to the listeners too. Like, if you grew up in a household that didn't have Jesus, if you grew up in a household where that was a void for you, it's just a choice. Even if it's a curiosity, like, Jesus, show me who you are, you
yeah,
know? You can invite him in, and it's an opportunity right now. It doesn't Your age is not relevant, because
yeah,
he's there for all of us, even if we haven't been
yes,
brought in, we didn't have that foundation. Or even if you had the foundation and it was almost like, I I
yeah,
equate my religious introduction to be like introducing me to a great lost aunt. So you knew who they were, you knew what they looked like, but you didn't really understand or know them at all. And so if
right.
that was your relationship, just know that it can be different. It doesn't have to stay stagnant. So
Yeah, and for me, I didn't grow up in a household with Jesus and God either. So,
yeah,
yeah.
that's
So,
so good.
yeah, it was the more that God was cursed in the household, the more I was like, no, that just doesn't feel right. I don't resonate with that, you
Yeah,
know?
did you find that you came in kind of like a corrector of the wrongs in your in your lineage? You know I remember yelling at my father who was watching and saying obscenities to the television and saying, "You're supposed to be the one teaching me. I'm not supposed to be the one telling you that this is wrong." Like get with the
Right.
program, people.
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
it's just it's so funny. How the littlest, right, out of the mouths of babes can
Yeah.
change the trajectory of the entire family line. And I think that
Right.
you're here for that. I think I'm here for that. I think most of my guests on this podcast are here for that. And
Yeah,
that's exciting.
absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
so my mother was born into a Catholic family, and they were very staunch Catholic, and it was all about, like, if you don't do everything right, Satan's going to come take you to hell, kind of stuff. And then she also grew up in Catholic school. So, you know, I know in my heart, even though she hasn't spoken about it, that there was a lot of abuse going on in my mom.
Yeah.
So, her grandmother actually died in an elevator accident, just tragic. And
Her grandmother.
yes,
And where was she?
my
Like what
grandmother's
location?
mother. So she was, I believe it was either in Canada or Washington.
Oh,
I
okay.
believe
So it
it must
was,
have been in Washington because they were down there at that point.
and this is your great grandmother?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So I believe that there's more to this story, but of course it's hard to find any paper trail or anything about it. But she was
Do
in
you
an old elevator, and she heard a voice she thought was her coworker, and she poked her head out of the elevator, and then the elevator crashed down on her.
This is back in the day when they had the gates and, the old, it wasn't just push a button, walk on in.
No, this was like the spiked gates.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it was pretty tragic, and I
So
believe
she
that
was
she was
guillotined
murdered.
essentially.
Yes, I believe that she was murdered, and that was my grandmother's mother.
Well,
So,
and even that, Monica, that trauma, that tragedy opens spiritual doors, to
yeah,
have
my
something
my
that
mom had a hard time with that.
intense come into your family line,
Yeah,
that can really just that alone can create some problems,
yeah,
not to mention just everything else that you've spoken about. So,
yeah,
well,
and
we have
she came out of abuse too. So my grandmother's father was very abusive, and so she ended up getting in a relationship with a gentleman who's in the Hall of Fame for, and I'll get his name. I just can't think of it at the moment, but I will get that. But in Canada, he was in the Hall of Fame for rugby. So yeah, so or lacrosse, I think it was. So yeah, and he took care of my great grandmother. So,
it's
and
interesting.
yeah, and so I'd like to kind of look into his background too, because he had status.
Yeah,
And
and you don't know, was he trying to hide something if,
right,
allegedly if he did something, but
yeah,
um
yeah,
so we have so much yet to discuss and we're starting to run out of time for today, but I would love for you to end with just kind of giving us a beginning taste about what it was like for you to grow up by Moss Beach. Everyone knows about the Blue Lady. I think that's
right.
something that everybody knows about the Moss Lake Distillery and the Blue Lady. So, connect how that somehow entangles into your story. Tell us about your childhood growing up in that area. I know you talked about your mom being involved in, uh,
Seances and
seances. Thank you. That was the word I was
stuff like
grasping for.
that. Yeah.
So let's bring a little bit more of that for today, and then we'll have to continue this story and unpack more in the next episode.
Sure. So, yeah, so I grew up right up the street from the Moss Beach Distillery. And I would walk by the Moss Beach Distillery, every day to the school bus. And there was just a lot of things in my life centered around the Moss Beach Distillery,
Yeah.
which led me into my first relationship with my first husband. But growing up there was just a lot of, like I loved climbing the beaches and the mountains, and there was a forest, and I had a horse, and so I was always riding my
Yeah,
horse.
aesthetically
And so,
beautiful, right? The area is
yeah,
beautiful,
oh
even
yes,
even beyond all the crazy that's happening there. It's just a
yes,
very beautiful area.
yes, it
Yeah.
was. And I was the only little girl in the neighborhood. They were all boys, and my brother, he was older, so I kind of would tag along with all his friends, because there was no little girls to play with. And so I didn't start getting into, psychics until I was in junior high, really. And then I was babysitting at one of the Moss Beach homes, and met a gal named Julie, who was like in her 30s at the time. And I became like best friends with Julie, and she introduced me into tarot cards and, psychics and stuff like that.
This is why you're a teenager. You're best
Yeah, a
friends with her.
young
Yeah.
teenager, because I was still
It's a
in
little
junior
little bit of
high.
an age gap.
Yeah, I know. You'd think something was wrong with that, right?
Yeah. I mean, more so for her to
So,
acknowledge than
but
but yes.
yeah,
Yeah.
I was very mature for my age, I guess. And, all the abuse that was coming out of the house, she was just perfect for me, and tarot cards and all that stuff. So,
Okay.
so yeah, because there was a lot of abuse. There was, every day it was something new. It was just always, my mom raging about one thing or another. And I remember when I was a little girl that she, when I was learning how to read and write, she would say that I was stupid and throw items at my head while I was trying to learn, and screaming at me that I was stupid.
Hmm.
So I already had learning disabilities, you know, and I had a lot of flight or how do you say it? Fight or flight response. So my earliest memories were flight or fight. So then I, got into a place with Julie that I felt comfortable, and I felt like, oh, well, these tarot cards are telling me kind of how the future is going to be. Why wouldn't I want to know what my future is going to be? Because my home life is hell. So that's kind of how I started into that whole world
Yeah.
of,
You wanted something to
comfortableness.
reassurance, something to look forward
Yes,
to, some stability. Yeah.
right.
I understand.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I was always trying to
That was the
escape.
perceived notion anyway.
Yes, exactly. So I was trying to escape out of that, out of my home life, and find a place where I felt like I fit in. And at that time, I was deceived to thinking that, okay, I fit here. This makes sense, and it's because I always had that relationship with God, I felt that, I was deceived into thinking that that was part of God, right? Which now we know is totally not true,
Right,
and,
right.
um,
But the
and
for my memory serves, the cards told you who your husband was going to be. Is that right?
that was later when I started getting into psychics. So
Okay.
this was early on into tarot. Yeah. So
Okay. Let's
it
talk
wasn't
about
until
that
I
real
got
quick, and then we'll come
okay.
back to the rest of the story on the next
Yeah.
episode.
So that was in high school. One of my friends said, "Hey, why don't you go?" I was kind of struggling because my home life, and suggested that I go see a psychic on the coast, and so I did. And so I had been working with that psychic for a while. They're kind of, how we're talking about closing generational doors and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Well, they say they can do the same thing, right?
Right.
So,
Yeah.
so I really pressed into, trying to, close some doors of my past, and they were helping me to do that. They were helping me, with candle lighting at a certain time of day and certain prayers and stuff like that, that they would, go through this process with you of cleansing. And so they had told me that I was going to meet my first husband. And so, what I want to say here is that when you get into that kind of stuff and it's not of God, it's divination,
Right.
the demons have connection to you and they
Hmm.
speak truth enough for you to be involved with it, but then it's for nefarious purposes.
Yeah.
So they made that union before,
Oh,
between
there's,
me and my first husband, I believe. I
yeah,
lost you there for a minute.
I know we got a little fuzzy there for a second, but so we'll just take back the power of our internet controls
Yes.
here. Grab the steering wheel again. But so let's end this episode with just sharing a little bit about your first husband. Um, we'll get into his details, but just leave us with a cliffhanger here, and we'll pick it up where we left off.
Well, the cliffhanger would be that after my first husband, I quickly found out that he was Frank Torres's great grand. It was his great grandfather. So
And
Frank
Frank Torres, yeah,
Torres,
okay.
Frank Torres was the owner and business owner of the Moss Beach Distillery, and he was also a bootlegger tied to high politicians, movie stars, and gangsters in the 1920s with bringing the alcohol into the Moss Beach Distillery, um, yes, under prohibition.
Right.
So, there's a lot of things that go on when you're involved with gangsters and high politicians. And so my thought is that they know who we are as much as we know who they are, and that Frank Torres knew who I was. And then I
Oh,
found
yeah.
out that my parents knew who Frank Torres was.
Yeah.
So that leads me into my relationship with my first husband.
And for the very few who don't know the story about the Blue Lady, if you just want to give us a quick summation of that right now so that they know how that ties to the Moss Lake Distillery.
Yeah, so my mom was directly connected with the Blue Lady through the seances and the mediums. And the Blue Lady was tied to the Moss Beach Distillery. She was caught up in a love triangle with her lover being a pianist that played at the Moss Beach Distillery, and her boyfriend at the time was a bootlegger gangster. So she was in the middle of a love triangle, and she ended up getting stabbed and killed. And they say that her spirit lives in the Moss Beach Distillery and on the coast there, that she travels around the coast. And so there was a lot of her energy, demonic energy going on, and my mother tied directly to her, who was
Yeah,
also
or whatever that apparition was, right?
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that ties us back to Frank Torres as well. And my parents knowing Frank Torres because we were all neighbors, and that whole connection.
Yeah, so we've got your grandmother who, you know, well, your great grandmother who had the tragic death, and her mother who was into conflict, and her mother or her daughter who's into conflict, and her daughter who was sick and brought up in Canada in a satanic area, which brings us to you, right? Who is dealing with all this stuff, who ties into the Moss Lake Distillery because your parents knew Frank, and Frank was the grandfather of your first husband, right? And that's just the
Great
beginning.
grandfather.
Great
Mhm.
grandfather, pardon. And
Mhm.
so that's just the beginning of how you are introduced to the chaos of the satanic world. So
Right.
we're going to leave our guests here.
Mhm.
It's so, there's just so much to unpack, guys. Be patient with us because this all comes back around and there is so much to absorb. So you may want to listen to this episode more than once because there's so much here. I'm sure that each and every listener will have something that that they piques their interest or stands up to take notice. So until next time, guys, we're going to leave you here. We'll come back. We'll have Monica talk a little bit more about, um, how her childhood and her relationships, entangle her into the satanic world, and how her current husband was recruited into become a satanic super soldier through his engagements in the military, and we'll unpack a lot more of that too as we move forward on this conversation. Until next time, Monica, thank you so much for joining us. We're
Thank
so
you,
so
Jennifer.
glad to have you.
Thank
um,
you.
I love you. So we're going to continue this in the next episode. So bye for now, guys. And you are listening to Love and the Lamb podcast.
Bye. God bless.